For over 1,000 years, a grave in southeastern Sweden held a secret that no one thought to question. The weapons were there, the horses were there, the full set of battle equipment that only 2 out of 1,100 known burials in this region had ever contained. All of it was there. So when archaeologists first documented this tomb in the late 1800s, they wrote down what they assumed to be obvious: a warrior, a man, case closed. They were wrong. And the way we discovered that error, more than a century later, using science that didn't exist when the grave was first opened, has changed the way we understand an entire civilization. This is the story of Birka grave BJ 581. The site sits near the town of Birka in southeastern Sweden, one of the most significant trading centers in the Viking world during the 9th and 10th centuries. Birka wasn't just a port, it was a crossroads, a place where Scandinavian warriors, Eastern merchants, and Northern European nobles met, traded, and built alliances. The people buried there were not ordinary. Out of 1,100 identified graves at Birka, only a fraction contained weapons at all, and only 2, just 2, held a complete warrior equipment set, the kind of burial that said, without ambiguity, this person commanded armies. Grave BJ 581 was one of those 2. When it was first excavated in the 1880s, the person inside was surrounded by a sword, an axe, a spear, armor-piercing arrows, a battle knife, 2 shields, and 2 horses positioned as if ready to ride. But that wasn't all. Beside the body lay a game board, along with a full set of gaming pieces. At first glance, this seems out of place among weapons, but archaeologists now understand these game pieces differently. They weren't for leisure. Boards like this one were used to plan military strategy, to map troop movements, to visualize battle formations. Whoever this person was, they didn't just fight. They planned, they directed, they led. For more than 100 years, that portrait, a male Viking war commander, went unquestioned. The artifacts told the story, and no one looked deeper than the artifacts. But in 2017, a team of researchers decided to look at the bones. What they found beneath the surface of those assumptions was not what anyone had prepared for. Using modern genomic sequencing, the same technology used today to trace ancestry and identify disease markers in ancient populations, researchers at Uppsala University and Stockholm University extracted DNA from the skeletal remains. They also conducted a detailed physical analysis of the bones themselves, the pelvic structure, the jawline, the skeletal proportions that biological science uses to determine sex. Every indicator pointed in the same direction. The warrior in grave BJ 581 was biologically female. The study was published in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology in September of 2017. It did not arrive quietly. The academic world pushed back almost immediately. Critics questioned whether the correct bones had been analyzed, whether the remains belonged to a single individual, or whether multiple bodies might have been interred together over time, which was not unheard of in Viking burial sites. Others raised the possibility that the individual may have held a gender identity that didn't conform to binary categories, that the grave might represent something more complex than either male or female in any modern sense. These were not unreasonable questions. Archaeology has a long history of rushing toward clean answers, and the Viking world was not simple. But the researchers did not dismiss the criticism. They responded to it. In 2019, a comprehensive reanalysis was published in the journal Antiquity that addressed every major objection. New DNA samples, more detailed genomic sequencing, thorough review of the skeletal evidence. The conclusion did not change. The individual was biologically female. Uppsala University issued a formal statement acknowledging what the evidence showed. The identification held. And now the harder question began. What does it mean that a woman was buried this way? The burial at BJ 581 wasn't a ceremonial gesture or a symbolic tribute to someone who had died young before fulfilling a warrior's role. This was a complete elite military burial. Every item present had a purpose. The weapons were real. The horses were working animals. The game board was a planning tool. Nothing in the grave suggested that this person's warrior identity was metaphorical or posthumous. It was documented, deliberate, and unambiguous in its intent. Viking ship and boat burials were reserved for the highest levels of society: chieftains, nobles, jarls, people whose status in life demanded a corresponding passage into death. Archaeologist Neil Price of Uppsala University has described these burial sites as more than ceremonial. not simply graves, but spaces for the living community to define and honor the dead. The act of burying someone in this manner was a public statement, witnessed by the living community, about who that person was and what they deserved to carry into the next world. To place a complete set of weapons in a grave, sword, axe, spear, shields, and 2 horses, and to add the tools of military command beside them, was to say something specific and intentional. The people who prepared this burial knew exactly who they were honoring. They had lived alongside her, served with her perhaps, watched her lead. What the 1800s archaeologists who first documented this site did not do was separate their assumptions from their observations. The weapons were there, so a male warrior must have been there too. The body was never studied through the lens of biological analysis, only through the lens of expectation, and that expectation had been encoded into archaeology for generations. The physical preservation of Viking burial sites varies enormously, and understanding why adds another layer to how difficult this kind of work truly is. Some sites survive in remarkable condition. The boat burial at Ardnamurchan in the Scottish Highlands, dating back roughly 1,000 years and representing the first intact Viking boat burial ever excavated on the British mainland, yielded a sword with a decorated hilt, a spear, a shield boss, an axe, and a bronze ring pin, all in a state described by researchers as beautifully preserved. The conditions of that particular burial site, the soil composition, the enclosed structure of the grave, all conspired to protect what was left behind. Others are not so fortunate. The Gjellestad ship burial in southeast Norway, discovered in 2018 beneath a farmer's field just 6 inches below the surface, presents one of the most sobering examples of what time and human activity can do to even the most significant archaeological sites. The vessel is estimated to have been approximately 19 to 20 meters long, placing it among the largest Viking ship burials ever identified. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed its outline clearly. The keel and nail arrangements were documented. A digital 3-dimensional model was created. But when researchers from the University of Oslo and the Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research conducted excavation in 2020 and 2021, what they found was extensive decay, wood fragments, iron rivets, possible animal bone. The organic material that might have told the story of whoever rested at the center of that enormous vessel had been ravaged by soil acidity, by agricultural drainage pipes installed in the mid-20th century, by earlier disturbance to the site before modern archaeology arrived to protect it. No human remains were recovered, no grave goods of significance. A ship that once carried someone important enough to require nearly 20 meters of timber and the ceremony of a Viking burial was now a faint impression in damaged earth. This is the challenge that haunts every team working these sites. The window to understand what lies beneath is not permanent. Moisture, fungi, temperature fluctuation, and continued soil degradation are active forces. The Norwegian government accelerated the timeline for Gjellestad's initial excavation, precisely because researchers warned that waiting would mean losing what remained. And even with that urgency, much had already been lost. At Gamla Uppsala, in central Sweden, ground-penetrating radar surveys have detected additional boat graves in the area. The sites remain unexcavated, protected in place, while researchers plan non-invasive monitoring programs and seek funding for future work. Every season that passes without excavation is a season in which organic material continues to break down, and every season with premature or under-resourced excavation risks destroying the very thing it was meant to find. The legal framework surrounding these sites is clear. In Norway, they fall under the Norwegian Cultural Heritage Act, overseen by the Norwegian Directorate of Cultural Heritage. In Sweden, equivalent protections apply. There is no private salvage, no commercial access, no negotiation with outside parties. These are national heritage sites, held in trust for future generations by national authorities. That framework exists because the history inside these graves belongs not to the person who finds them, but to the understanding of an entire civilization. The story of Birka grave BJ 581 doesn't end with the confirmation of her identity. In many ways, it begins there, because the deeper question, the one that scholars have been circling since 2017, isn't just about this one woman. It's about how many others were misidentified before genomic science existed to check. Skeletal analysis wasn't standard practice in 19th century excavation. Graves were assigned gender based on what was found inside them. Female-coded objects, jewelry, textiles, domestic tools, meant a woman was buried there. Male-coded objects, weapons, horses, tactical equipment, meant a man. The logic seemed self-evident, but it was circular. It assumed that only men carried weapons into battle, and then used the presence of weapons as proof that a warrior was male. The Oseberg ship burial in Norway, dated to 834, contained 2 women buried together, extensively documented, with an extraordinary range of artifacts including elaborately carved wooden furniture, a richly equipped kitchen, and bedding materials filled with down from eider ducks, cormorants, and gulls. Oseberg has always been understood as a female burial, in part because its contents fit a different set of expectations. Wealth, yes. Ceremony, absolutely. But the objects were domestic and artistic rather than military. The contrast with BJ 581 is striking, not because one burial is more significant than the other, but because both challenge the same underlying assumption, that what a person carried into death tells us who they were in life, only if we're willing to follow the evidence, rather than our expectations. Scholars who study these sites use a phrase that has become something of a guiding principle in modern Viking archaeology. The combination of ancient genomics, isotope analysis, and archaeological context can rewrite our understanding of social organization, of gender, of mobility, of occupation in past societies. That sentence appeared in the academic literature surrounding the Birka Reanalysis, and it represents something larger than one grave. There are 1,100 identified tombs at Birka alone. Across Scandinavia and the British Isles, there are thousands more. Most were excavated before DNA analysis was possible. Many were documented in eras when gender assumptions were so deeply embedded in scholarly practice that no one thought to question them. How many of those burials were misread? Some researchers argue that the absence of battle injuries on the skeleton inside BJ 581 suggests this individual may have held a command position, directing forces rather than engaging in direct combat. Others counter that this distinction, even if accurate, doesn't diminish the warrior classification. Commanders are warriors. Strategists are warriors. The game board and the weapons together tell a coherent story of someone who led from the front in every sense that mattered to Viking society. The debate isn't fully resolved. It probably won't be for years. And that ambiguity, that space where the evidence is clear but the interpretation remains open, is where the most honest archaeological work lives. There is a hypothesis, still unconfirmed, still without peer-reviewed publication, that a burial site on the coast of Cumbria in England may contain the remains of Ivar the Boneless, one of the most feared Viking commanders of the 9th century. Archaeologist Dickinson has pointed to a site known as the King's Mound, where large ship rivets, lead weights consistent with a silver hoard, and 39 surrounding smaller burial mounds have been identified. If confirmed, it would be among only a handful of monumental Viking ship burials identified across northwest Europe and would represent the first such find within the United Kingdom. That work hasn't happened yet. The confirmation doesn't exist. But the methodology that would be used to investigate it, ground-penetrating radar, careful test excavation, genomic analysis, isotope study, is the same methodology that revealed who was truly buried at Birka. The tools now exist to ask questions that previous generations couldn't ask. The science can reach back through 1,000 years of soil and silence and tell us things about these individuals that not even their contemporaries recorded. It can overturn a century of assumptions with a single genomic result. It can turn a warrior the world thought it knew into someone entirely new. In 2017, in a published study that shook the field of Viking archaeology, a woman buried with a sword, 2 horses, and a military strategy board was finally introduced to history under her own terms. Not the terms the 1800s assigned her. Not the terms that weapons were supposed to mean, but the terms the bones themselves provided when someone finally thought to ask. The grave at Birka held its secret for over 1,000 years. There are thousands of graves in Scandinavia and the British Isles that haven't been asked the same questions yet. The past is not finished speaking. We are only now beginning to listen.